For several years now, Samsung has had 4 models of 4K QLED TVs. While they were once known as the Q6, Q7, Q8, and Q9, they're now the Q60, Q70, Q80, and Q90. Today we'll be taking a look at 2020's Q80T to see how it performs to last year's Q80R, as well as the slightly lower-end Q70T and last year's Q70R. Hey, I'm Nick. I'm a writer here at Ratings.com where we help people find the best products for their needs. Remember to subscribe to our channel or check out our website to see hundreds of reviews on TVs, soundbars, and more. In this video, we'll start by taking a look at the design and inputs of the Q80T, then we'll move on to our test results for the picture quality. We'll also take a look at motion handling, input lag, and sound. Throughout the video, I'll be comparing the Q80T to its naming predecessor from last year, the Q80R. It's worth noting that Samsung have actually bumped all the models down one number this year. So while the Q80T succeeds the Q80R in name, it may be considered more of a replacement to last year's Q70R, so we'll be comparing it to that TV as well. Throughout the video, I'll also do some comparisons to this year's Q70T to see if it's worth it to step up from that model to this one if you're in the market for a new TV. If you'd like to skip straight to our test results, then see the links in the description below. We purchased the 55-inch Q80T, but it's also available in a 49-inch as well as larger sizes all the way up to 85 inches. It's worth noting that while we expect the larger sizes to perform very similarly overall, the 49-inch has a lower 60 Hz refresh rate panel and lacks FreeSync support. So while we haven't tested it, we'd expect its motion and gaming performance to be lower. The design of the Q80T is quite a bit different than last year's Q80R, as it now has a center stand that's somewhat similar to last year's top-of-the-line Q90R, though it doesn't look quite as nice and premium. The borders of this TV are extremely thin all the way around the screen and are thinner than any of the QLED models from last year. The center stand has a smaller footprint, meaning you should be able to fit this TV on most tables or stands, and it supports the TV well, though it does wobble a bit more than a TV with wide-set feet, like this year's Q70T, as well as last year's Q80R. The controls on the TV are the same as Samsung's other 2020 QLED TVs we've tested so far, and consists of a single button below the Samsung logo in the middle of the TV. Since all controls are done with a single button, it requires a different series of long or short presses to activate different commands, which can be frustrating. Last year's QLED TVs had 5 different buttons, which made them quite a bit easier to control, and it's a shame that they went to the single button this year on all their QLED models. When we move around to the side, you'll see that the TV is thin and looks good. It sits close to the wall when wall-mounted, which is nice. The back of the TV looks very similar to last year's Q80R, with all your inputs facing sideways, making it easier to access them when your TV's wall-mounted. All of the available inputs are the same as Samsung's QLED TVs from last year. You've got 4 HDMI ports, 2 USB ports, 1 digital optical audio out, 1 Ethernet input, and your tuner input. As far as cable management, there's routing through the back of the TV and stand that allows you to easily tuck your wires out of view. Now we'll move on to the picture quality. As always, check out our website for an updated comparison with new TVs as we buy and test them. First up is the contrast ratio. The contrast ratio is the relative brightness of white versus dark areas in a scene and is generally considered one of the most important aspects of picture quality. TVs with a high contrast ratio appear to have more detail in dark scenes without those details getting lost in the gray. Unfortunately, the contrast of this TV isn't quite as good as last year's Q80R, though it's still very good overall, and this difference could be due to panel variances. Thankfully, they haven't removed the full array local dimming of this TV like they did on this year's Q70T. While the native contrast ratio is still great, it's quite a bit lower than some other Samsung TVs, including the lower-end Q70T. This can likely be attributed to the inclusion of the ultra viewing angle layer, which we'll discuss a little bit more later on. While this TV still has local dimming, unfortunately it doesn't work quite as well as last year's Q80R. In total darkness, there's noticeable blooming that affects the entire horizontal section of the screen and can crush some bright details, like the stars in the opening crawl of Star Wars. Luckily, with most real content, it looks great and this isn't too noticeable or distracting, and we didn't notice the same detail crushing happening when watching Netflix's One Planet. Overall, its local dimming performs similarly to last year's Q70R. Now on to gray uniformity. Our gray uniformity test checks for issues with the panel where different pixels are supposed to display the same color but may not. This can result in distracting areas known as the dirty screen effect, which is most noticeable during intense movement, such as while playing video games or watching sports. The gray uniformity performance of our Q80T was actually almost identical to last year's Q80R. They both performed only decent, and the screen gets a bit darker around the edges of the screen, especially in the corners. While you may notice some minor dirty screen effect with very fast-moving objects, it shouldn't be too noticeable to most people overall. It's worth noting that gray uniformity can vary between units, even of the same model, so ours might perform differently than yours. If you come across a panel that doesn't correspond to our results, let us know in the comments below. Now on to viewing angles. With LED screens, the image colors can degrade when viewing the TV from an angle. This means that having good viewing angles can be important if you watch a lot of sports with a large group of people, where some may be sitting on an angle to the TV, or if your living room is set up in such a way where your couch isn't facing your TV head-on. Like most Samsung TVs, the Q80T uses a VA-type panel. While this gives much deeper and more uniform blacks than an IPS panel, it also has much worse viewing angles. Luckily, like last year's Q80R, Samsung implemented their Ultra Viewing Angle layer on this TV that helps drastically improve viewing angles, and it actually performs slightly better than last year's Q80R. In comparison to this year's Q70T, that TV doesn't have this extra layer, and it performs noticeably worse in this regard. Overall, the Q80T is a decent choice if you have a setup where you need wide viewing angles. If your TV is in a very bright and well-lit room, good reflection handling is important to cut the amount of glare you see on the screen during dark scenes. The Q80T's reflection handling is outstanding, and the glossy screen does an excellent job at minimizing glare and reflections. This TV does a drastically better job at reflection handling than the step-down Q70T, thanks to that ultra viewing angle layer that I mentioned earlier, which diffuses light differently than most TVs, scattering it around the screen. Unfortunately, this may cause some rainbow reflections across the screen that you won't see on most TVs. Overall, this TV handles reflections almost identically to last year's Q80R. SDR peak brightness refers to how bright your screen can get when watching most standard non-HDR content. A brighter screen helps your TV overcome reflections and glare during brighter scenes. Unfortunately, this TV can't get nearly as bright as last year's Q80R, so while its reflection handling is about identical during dark scenes, you may notice a bit more glare during bright scenes, especially if you watch a lot of daytime TV in a room with a lot of windows. Overall, its SDR peak brightness is very similar to last year's Q70R, which is more the true predecessor of this TV. If you watch a lot of HDR content from services like Netflix or play HDR games from your Xbox One or PS4 Pro, then the ability to produce brighter regions of the image is important to produce impactful highlight detail. This is one of the most noticeable reasons why some TVs seem to really pop with HDR content while others don't. Unfortunately, while the Q80T's HDR peak brightness is great, it isn't nearly as high as last year's Q80R and is even slightly lower than last year's Q70R, so HDR content won't pop quite as well. That being said, this TV's HDR peak brightness is much higher than this year's Q70T, so if you're stuck between those two models and HDR content is important to you, you may want to spend the extra bucks to step up to this TV from that one. Also important for HDR is the ability to take advantage of the wider color spaces that content can be mastered in. While the color gamut of this TV isn't quite as wide as last year's Q80R, it's still great and is slightly better than the Q70T. If you watch a lot of sports or play a lot of video games, motion handling may be the most important aspect of a TV to you. Along with both last year's Q80R as well as this year's Q70T, this TV uses a 120 Hz panel. That being said, overall this TV has slightly better motion handling than last year's Q80R, thanks in part to its faster response time. It's worth noting that while we haven't tested it, the 49-inch uses a 60 Hz panel, so we'd expect its motion performance to be worse overall. Response time is an average of the time it takes for the TV to transition from one color to the next. The response time of the Q80T is outstanding, and it's a bit faster than last year's Q80R. There's some overshoot noticeable in some scenes, though overall it performs extremely well, and you shouldn't notice much blur or motion trails. It performs much better than the Q70T, making this TV a better choice if you watch a lot of sports or play a lot of games. To help reduce motion blur, the Q80T has an optional black frame insertion feature. This can be enabled by selecting the LED clear motion setting in movie mode. This results in a clear image with less persistent blur, and it performs as remarkably as last year's Q80R, and quite a bit better than this year's Q70T. Luckily, unlike the Q70T, LED clear motion will work in game mode, and will drop the flicker frequency to 60 Hz, resulting in a crisper image. If you plan on using your TV for gaming, input lag can be very important. While most higher-end TVs now have low enough input lag that you likely won't notice any delay, the lag of the Q80T with Gamut enabled is remarkably low. For most signals, it's under 10 milliseconds, which is close to the theoretical minimum at 60 Hz. This is one of the best 60 Hz results we've ever seen on a 120 Hz TV, and it performs marginally better than the Q70T, making this TV feel incredibly responsive while gaming. Like last year's Q80R and this year's Q70T, this TV also supports FreeSync variable refresh rate technology to reduce screen tearing while gaming. You don't have to enable it, as it turns on automatically when it detects an Xbox One or computer that supports it, which is convenient. Now on to smart features. Like with all Samsung smart TVs, the Q80T uses Samsung's own Tizen OS, and like other 2020 Samsung TVs, it has a slightly simpler interface with no animations and darker graphics. It's easy to use, and we found that the interface is much smoother on this TV than the Q70T. This TV seems to suffer from the same overscan bug with the Smart OS that we've experienced while testing all of Samsung's 2020 TVs. It doesn't happen very often, so we don't expect it to be a problem for most people, and it's possible that a future firmware update may eliminate it. The details of this bug and how to fix it can be found in our written review for this TV, linked below. Samsung seems to have made some slight improvements to the built-in speakers of this year's TV, which is more than welcome. The speakers on the Q80T are better balanced than last year's model. They're still lacking a bit in bass, but they can get a tiny bit louder and will do in a pinch. However, if you're investing this much in a TV, you'll enjoy the experience considerably more if you go with a dedicated sound system or a soundbar. Overall, the Q80T is an excellent TV for most uses. Unfortunately, it isn't an upgrade over last year's Q80R and performs slightly worse in every regard except for motion. That being said, it's a bit better than last year's Q70R and a lot better than this year's Q70T. If you're looking to pick up a new TV this year and are stuck between the Samsung Q70T and the Q80T, you can rest assured that the Q80T does perform a fair amount better in almost every aspect. So that's it. What do you think of the 2020 Samsung Q80T? Is it worth the extra bucks over the Q70T? Let us know what you think in the comments below. You can check out all of our measurements on our website. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel, or become an insider on the website to access our latest results first. Also, we're currently hiring in our offices in Montreal for various positions. So if you want to help people find the best products for their needs, you can check out the careers page on our website. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.